My 31-year marriage took a turn after I found out about my wife's affair. Reddit family, welcome to Silent Wars, your favorite spot for real-life stories and emotional journeys. Today, we're diving into a powerful Reddit family story that explores the complexities of family relationships, trust, and betrayal. If you've ever faced challenges in your family dynamics, this story will definitely resonate with you. Make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and stay tuned for more stories like this that bring insight and reflection. Let's get started. In a quiet, suburban neighborhood, a primary school teacher's life was forever altered by an unexpected discovery that shattered the foundation of a 31-year marriage. The man, who had spent years building his career and family life, suddenly found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about his wife, Terry. His discovery wasn't just a passing suspicion, it was a painful, undeniable truth. As he gathered evidence and began the painful process of confronting betrayal, his world began to unravel in ways he could never have anticipated. For years, this man had prided himself on his stable and predictable routine. His life revolved around the school, the children he taught, and the quiet moments he shared with his wife. He was a dedicated teacher, with regular hours and a dependable schedule that allowed him to come home at the same time every evening. Terry, his wife of more than 3 decades, often spent her Tuesday evenings at the gym, leaving him to take care of household chores and prepare dinner. Though their marriage had seen its fair share of struggles, particularly financial difficulties, he believed they were weathering the storm together. The distance he felt from Terry lately, however, hadn't gone unnoticed. On one particular Tuesday afternoon, as the man returned home earlier than usual due to a canceled staff meeting, he was greeted by an unsettling sight. Terry's car was in the garage, but that wasn't what caught his attention. What struck him first was her purse, sitting out in plain view on the kitchen counter, a place she always kept it close by. This small detail was enough to raise questions. As he walked through the house, something felt off. Her exercise clothes, her snug leotard, and a large towel lay carelessly on the floor, an unusual sight in their otherwise orderly home. Then, as he made his way upstairs, the true shock awaited him. A pair of men's shoes were left on the stairs, an unmistakable sign that someone else had been in their home. As he continued up, the clothes scattered across the stairs' slacks, a shirt, tank top, and socks were not his own, nor were they part of Terry's usual wardrobe. As he reached the top of the stairs, he was met with the harsh reality that confirmed his deepest fears. The sounds of moaning and grunting from the bedroom could not be ignored, and through the slightly ajar closet door, he saw the painful betrayal unfold before his eyes. His heart pounded in his chest as he fumbled with his phone, documenting the scene for later use. The calm and controlled demeanor he had always prided himself on vanished, replaced by a gut-wrenching mix of disbelief, rage, and utter despair. His wife, the woman he had loved and trusted, was in bed with another man. He stood frozen in the doorway, unable to tear his gaze away. As the man and his wife continued their intimate encounter, the realization that his marriage had been a lie consumed him. His life, once filled with routine and comfort, was now marked by the painful sting of betrayal. After witnessing the scene, he fled the house, unable to remain in the space that had once felt like home. He wandered aimlessly, eventually finding himself in a park, sitting on a bench with his emotions running high. The video footage he had recorded on his phone became a cruel reminder of the devastation that had just unfolded in his life. It was at this moment that the full weight of the situation hit him, and for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to cry. When he returned home later that evening, Terry noticed immediately that something was wrong. His pale complexion, red eyes, and disheveled appearance did not go unnoticed. But instead of confronting her about what he had discovered, he chose to lie. In a weak voice, he claimed he wasn't feeling well, and he retreated to the spare room to sleep, hoping the distance would provide some clarity. Terry, seemingly unaffected, carried on with her usual routine, unaware of the emotional storm that had taken place just hours earlier. In the following days, the man, still reeling from the discovery, made the difficult decision to find out if this affair was an isolated incident or an ongoing betrayal. He began following Terry's movements more closely, tracking her gym visits and interactions with her lover. As he continued his quiet investigation, he realized that the affair was not a one-time occurrence. He uncovered more about Terry's gym activities and the man involved, a personal trainer named Phil, who appeared to be manipulating not only his wife, but also several other women at the gym. The man's methodical approach to gathering evidence grew more intense with each passing day. Armed with cameras and listening devices, he began recording every moment of Terry's interactions with her lover. He spent hours carefully positioning the cameras to capture both video and audio, documenting everything that he would later use in the inevitable confrontation. His marriage, once filled with trust and love, was now reduced to a web of lies and deceit, and he was determined to uncover every detail. As the days passed, the man's anger and sense of betrayal intensified. He began to plan his exit strategy. The once structured and orderly life he had known was slipping through his fingers, and he realized that his future no longer involved Terry. He prepared for divorce, securing his financial assets and moving his belongings to a new home. He didn't need his wife's approval or control anymore. He was determined to rebuild his life on his own terms. In the end, the man confronted Terry with the evidence he had gathered. He left her a packet of documents, including the videos and photographs that exposed her infidelity. The emotional toll of the betrayal was immense, but he had finally taken control of his life again. His marriage was over, and he was ready to move on. The fallout from Terry's affair was swift and severe. As the man moved forward with his divorce, the scandal surrounding her lover, Phil, unraveled. The gym where he worked closed down, and his reputation was tarnished. Terry's actions led to public shame and humiliation, and the couple's children, who had long been unaware of their mother's betrayal, sided with their father. In the aftermath, the man found solace in the support of his children and in his new life. Though the scars of betrayal would take time to heal, he was free from the lies that had once defined his existence. His story is one of heartbreak, but also of strength and resilience. It serves as a powerful reminder that even in the darkest of times, we can find the courage to take back control and rebuild our lives from the ashes of betrayal. After 31 years of marriage, a man's life was turned upside down when he discovered his wife's affair. The shock came when he was not expecting it and uncovered the painful truth in the most heart-wrenching way possible. As a primary school teacher with a stable schedule, his life had been orderly and predictable. But a series of unsettling events, starting with a canceled staff meeting, led to a chain of discoveries that would forever alter his marriage and his understanding of trust. For the man, his life had always been predictable. He worked regular hours as a teacher and was typically home by 7 p.m. on Tuesday evenings, a time when his wife, Terry, would often be exhausted from her gym routines. In the quiet of their home, he would prepare dinner while she took care of household chores. Their marriage had experienced its struggles, notably around money and Terry's increasing need for control. Despite these difficulties, he believed they were still a team, working through their problems together. But lately, something had felt off, a growing distance between them that he could not ignore. One Tuesday afternoon, when the man's staff meeting was unexpectedly canceled, he decided to leave work early. He arrived home with the intention of preparing dinner and making the evening special, hoping it would rekindle the intimacy that seemed to have faded in their marriage. However, as he walked into the house, he was immediately struck by something unusual. Terry's purse, which she was always careful to keep nearby, was left unattended on the kitchen counter. This small, seemingly insignificant detail caused him to pause. His mind raced, and as he moved further into the house, the unsettling signs continued. He noticed her workout clothes, a snug leotard, and a large towel on the floor beside the counter, which seemed out of place. Then came the sound from upstairs, strange noises that he initially attributed to Terry being unwell, but as he climbed the stairs, he found men's shoes on the steps, followed by clothes slacks, a shirt, tank top, and socks mixed in with Terry's undergarments. The realization hit him like a freight train. His heart pounded in his chest as he made his way up the stairs, each step bringing him closer to a truth he never expected to face. Reaching the top of the stairs, he stood frozen, witnessing the unimaginable. Terry, the woman he had spent over 3 decades with, was in bed with another man. His calm, controlled demeanor, honed through years of managing classrooms full of children, evaporated in an instant. In that moment, he was no longer the patient, steady teacher. He was consumed by rage and disbelief. The anger surged through him as he watched the betrayal unfold in front of his eyes, unable to tear himself away. Despite the pain and betrayal, he knew that this moment needed to be documented. He quietly retrieved his phone and began recording what he was witnessing, knowing that this footage would be essential when he confronted Terry. His emotions were a mix of disbelief and fury as he stood there, watching his wife, the woman he had loved, trusted, and built a life with, betray him in the most painful way imaginable. After the encounter, he left the house, walking aimlessly until he found himself in a nearby park, trying to process the overwhelming emotions coursing through him. He reviewed the footage on his phone, the cold, hard evidence of the destruction of his marriage. It was only then, in the solitude of the park, that he allowed himself to cry. The devastation was all too real, and he finally understood that everything he had known and believed was a lie. When he returned home that evening, Terry noticed his disheveled appearance and immediately asked if something was wrong. But instead of confronting her with the truth, he lied, telling her that his stomach was upset and that he needed to sleep in the spare room. Terry, seemingly oblivious to the gravity of the situation, continued with her usual routine, unaware of the emotional storm that had just hit their home. Over the next few days, the man's emotional turmoil continued to grow as he grappled with the devastating realization of what had been happening behind his back. Despite the emotional pain, he knew he needed answers. Was this affair a one-time mistake, or was it an ongoing betrayal? He began to track Terry's movements, spying on her gym visits and quietly observing her interactions with the man who had become her lover. His investigation revealed more about the affair, and it was clear that it was not a fleeting moment of weakness. It was a full-blown, ongoing relationship. The man's feelings of betrayal deepened as he realized that his wife had been living a double life. In the process of gathering evidence, he discovered more about her lover, a personal trainer named Phil, who had been meeting with Terry at the gym for private sessions. He learned that Phil was not only involved with Terry, but also had relationships with other women at the gym. The man, driven by anger and the need for justice, began to meticulously gather evidence, recording every detail of Terry's interactions with Phil. His obsession with uncovering the full extent of the affair led him to set up hidden cameras and surveillance equipment to document their every move. As he continued his investigation, the man's anger began to take a darker turn. He meticulously planned his next steps, ensuring that he would have all the evidence he needed when the time came to confront Terry. His life, once centered around family and routine, had been reduced to a calculated quest for revenge. He moved his assets into separate accounts, bought a new home, and began to prepare for the divorce he knew was inevitable. The emotional toll of the situation was immense. The man, who had always prided himself on being calm and rational, found himself consumed by feelings of anger and betrayal. His once stable life had crumbled, and he was forced to confront the reality that everything he had built was based on lies. But despite the pain, he knew that he had to move forward. The divorce was inevitable, and he needed to start rebuilding his life. Eventually, he confronted Terry, leaving behind the evidence of her infidelity and a note that told her their marriage was over. The fallout was swift. Terry, faced with the truth of her actions, was forced to confront the consequences of her betrayal. The local community was shocked by the scandal, and the gym where Phil worked was forced to close its doors. The man's life, once full of routine and familiarity, had been irrevocably changed. But in the aftermath of the betrayal, he found a new sense of freedom and purpose. This painful journey of discovery, betrayal, and ultimately, liberation serves as a reminder that even in the darkest of times, it is possible to take control of your own future. While the scars of betrayal may never fully heal, the strength to move on and rebuild a life from the ruins is within reach. It is a story of heartbreak, yes, but also of resilience, courage, and the power of self-reinvention. After years of building what he thought was a strong and trusting relationship, a man discovers the unthinkable. His fiancée has been having an affair. This revelation, coming after years of commitment and trust, leads him to make the difficult decision to leave the relationship and start anew. What follows is a journey of heartbreak, self-discovery, and ultimately, the realization that moving on from toxic relationships is essential for personal growth. The man had been in a committed relationship with Sarah for years. They had planned a future together, shared dreams, and built a life based on love and mutual understanding. But everything changed when Sarah, whom he had planned to marry, asked for a break due to her growing feelings for another man at work. At first, he was confused and unsure of what to do. A break in a relationship can often be an opportunity for reflection and resolution, but it was clear that Sarah's feelings for someone else had gone beyond mere attraction. The emotional weight of this request began to gnaw at him, but he didn't immediately walk away. Instead, he took time to process and understand what this meant for their future. The man's emotions were raw and painful. He had given so much to this relationship, and now, the woman he had planned to marry was asking for space because of another person. The emotional impact was overwhelming, and in his mind, he wondered if he had somehow failed or if there was something more he could have done to keep her committed. The hurt of her request stayed with him, but what came next would solidify the inevitability of their separation. Soon after the request for a break, Sarah's feelings shifted entirely. She broke up with him, saying that she had met someone else. This sudden rejection was like a punch to the gut. The man, devastated and left reeling from the loss, decided to leave. He packed his things and moved to a new city, hoping that a fresh start would give him the space he needed to heal. This decision was not an easy one, but he knew it was the only way to break free from the toxic cycle of emotional pain and uncertainty. Starting over was a monumental challenge. Moving to a new city meant leaving behind everything that was familiar: his friends, his job, and most importantly, the life he had built with Sarah. But in some strange way, it also felt like the right thing to do. The relationship had been clouded by her infidelity, and while it had once been a source of joy, it had transformed into something he no longer recognized. This new chapter, though uncertain, promised the possibility of healing and finding a version of happiness that was independent of Sarah and the betrayal he had suffered. The emotional journey that followed was not linear. There were days when the pain of Sarah's betrayal felt overwhelming, and the man found himself questioning everything. How had he not seen the signs? Why had he been so blind to her growing affection for another man? There was a sense of shame, not only for the relationship's collapse, but for the feeling of inadequacy that accompanied it. But as time passed, he began to realize something. Her actions were not a reflection of his worth. Instead, they spoke volumes about her inability to honor the commitment they had shared. The affair was not a mistake he had caused. It was a choice she had made. Throughout this period of self-reflection, the man sought solace in building a new life for himself. He found new friends, built a new career path, and slowly but surely began to reclaim his confidence. His emotional scars were deep, but they also became the foundation for his personal growth. He realized that in order to move forward, he had to release the past. The emotional weight of holding on to anger and resentment would only keep him chained to Sarah and the hurt she caused. It was time to let go and embrace a future that was not defined by betrayal. Sarah's attempts to reconnect were persistent. She reached out to him several times after their breakup, trying to rekindle the relationship, but each time he refused to engage. He knew that allowing her back into his life would only open old wounds that had yet to fully heal. Sarah, for her part, seemed unable to understand why he was unwilling to consider a second chance. She would stalk him on social media, trying to gauge his feelings and pull him back into the toxic dynamic they had once shared. But the man remained resolute in his decision to move on, despite the emotional pull of his past with her. Eventually, Sarah's attempts to contact him tapered off. He had made it clear that he no longer wished to have any further communication. While part of him still wondered about the what-ifs, he knew deep down that there was no future for them together. Her actions had made it impossible for him to trust her again, and without trust, any relationship was doomed. It became evident that moving on was not just necessary, it was the only way for him to preserve his own sense of self-worth and happiness. During this time, the man began to realize something deeply empowering. He had lived most of his adult life in the shadow of a relationship that, in many ways, had been built on false promises. The betrayal Sarah had inflicted upon him had opened his eyes to the fact that he had been too willing to sacrifice his own needs and boundaries for the sake of the relationship. The affair had been the catalyst for him to reevaluate what he wanted in life, what he deserved, and how he could create a healthier, more fulfilling future. In the end, the man chose to move forward with his life, embracing the opportunity for personal growth and healing. He realized that he was capable of love, of building meaningful connections, and of creating a life on his terms. The pain of the breakup, while never fully gone, became less defining as he focused on his own healing journey. His story is a testament to the power of self-respect, the importance of boundaries, and the resilience that comes from leaving behind toxic relationships. This experience, though heartbreaking, ultimately led him to a place of strength and self-empowerment. He learned that sometimes, in order to move forward, you have to let go of the past, no matter how painful it may be. And through that process, you rediscover who you are and what you are truly capable of. The journey of healing and moving on, though challenging, is always worth it in the end. After decades of dedication, support, and financial sacrifices for his family, Jake discovers a painful truth. His parents, whom he had helped for years, left everything in their will to his lazy and entitled brother, Eric. This shocking betrayal ultimately leads him to cut ties with his parents and confront the realization that, despite all the sacrifices he made, his family had always prioritized Eric, the golden child, over him. Growing up in a family where expectations and obligations seemed to always fall on his shoulders, Jake had always felt like the responsible child. From a young age, he took on the role of the reliable son, the one who worked hard, excelled in school, and followed the rules. He watched as his parents lavished attention on his younger brother, Eric, who, despite being lazy and irresponsible, was the family's golden child. Eric's actions were often excused. He was allowed to make mistakes, shirk responsibilities, and yet still be the recipient of praise and adoration from their parents. Jake never questioned this dynamic, at least not until he became an adult. Throughout his college years, he worked tirelessly to support his family, giving up personal time and energy to ensure that his parents had what they needed. He made sacrifices, not only for his own education, but also for the well-being of his family. He worked long hours at a part-time job to contribute financially, paid off debts, and even gave up opportunities to advance his own career to help his family when they needed it. But despite his efforts, he never felt truly appreciated. Jake's frustration grew as Eric continued to coast through life without facing the consequences of his actions. Eric's laziness and lack of ambition were not only tolerated but often rewarded, while Jake was expected to shoulder the burden of responsibility. Even when Jake found success in his career and became financially stable, his parents still demanded that he support them, while Eric continued to receive special treatment. The unfairness of it all began to wear on him, but he remained dutiful, hoping that one day his parents would recognize his contributions and the sacrifices he had made for their sake. Years went by, and Jake's resentment toward his parents and brother continued to simmer beneath the surface. He felt trapped in a toxic family dynamic where his efforts were taken for granted, and Eric's reckless behavior was constantly excused. But it wasn't until Jake's parents passed away that the full extent of the betrayal became clear. Upon the reading of their will, Jake was shocked to discover that all of his parents' assets, including their home and savings, were left to Eric. Despite the fact that Jake had financially supported them for years, his parents had made Eric the sole beneficiary of their estate. This was a gut-wrenching blow for Jake, who had always believed that his hard work and sacrifices would eventually be recognized. Instead, it felt as if his years of loyalty and commitment had been completely disregarded in favor of his lazy, irresponsible brother. Jake was devastated. The realization that his parents had not only failed to appreciate his efforts, but had actively chosen to reward Eric for his selfish behavior shattered him. This was the ultimate betrayal, one that revealed just how little his parents truly valued him. He had given up so much for them, only to be left with nothing, while Eric, who had done nothing to deserve their inheritance, received everything. The emotional toll of this discovery was immense. Jake felt not only hurt, but angry, as if he had been taken advantage of for his entire life. In the aftermath of the reading of the will, Jake made the difficult decision to confront his parents. He was angry, hurt, and confused, and he needed answers. He reached out to them, hoping to have a conversation about the will, to understand why they had made such a decision. But when he confronted his parents, their response was cold and dismissive. They offered no explanation, no apology, just a simple justification for their actions that made it clear they had no intention of acknowledging the hurt they had caused him. That was the final straw for Jake. He realized that his parents had never truly seen him for who he was. They had never appreciated the sacrifices he had made or the love he had shown them. Instead, they had always prioritized Eric, the golden child, and that priority had cost Jake everything. It was time for him to let go of the toxic family dynamic and move on with his life. Jake decided to cut ties with his parents completely. He couldn't continue living in a relationship that was so one-sided and emotionally damaging. The decision was not an easy one, but Jake knew it was the only way he could start healing and moving forward. He recognized that by continuing to engage with his parents, he was only holding on to a relationship that had never been built on mutual respect or love. He had given everything to them, and in return, they had given him nothing but disappointment and betrayal. As Jake distanced himself from his parents and began to focus on his own life, he started to realize something powerful. His worth was not determined by their approval or recognition. For years, he had sought validation from them, hoping that one day they would appreciate all that he had done. But in the end, it was clear that their love and appreciation were conditional, based solely on Eric's behavior and the false image of the perfect family they had created around him. Jake's decision to cut ties with his parents was an act of self-care and self-respect. It allowed him to reclaim his life and focus on what truly mattered, his own happiness and well-being. It was not an easy path, but it was a necessary one. He knew that he couldn't change the past, but he could choose to shape his future in a way that honored his own values and boundaries. In the years that followed, Jake built a new life for himself, one that was free from the toxic influence of his parents. He focused on his career, built meaningful relationships with friends who appreciated him for who he was, and learned to prioritize his own needs and happiness. He discovered that true family was not defined by blood, but by the people who supported him and loved him unconditionally. Jake's story is a powerful reminder that we all have the right to stand up for ourselves and walk away from toxic relationships, even when those relationships are with family. It's never easy to let go of the people who are supposed to love and support us, but sometimes it's the only way to find peace and healing. By recognizing our own worth and refusing to accept mistreatment, we can create healthier, more fulfilling lives for ourselves. After the death of his father, the dynamics of one man's family began to change dramatically, primarily due to the demands of his spoiled sister, Nancy. This change led to increased financial and emotional strain on the man, who had already been battling to provide for his brother's medical bills. The conflict with his sister reached a boiling point when her self-centered demands for money and attention began to overshadow any sense of family unity or support. This situation finally forced the man to take a painful but necessary step: to distance himself from his mother and sister in order to preserve his own emotional and financial well-being. The man's name was not revealed in the story, but his experiences reflect the pain and frustration that many adults face when navigating toxic family relationships, particularly after the death of a patriarch. This story began with a tragic loss, the passing of his father. However, the real complications arose not from his grief, but from the increasing demands placed on him by his sister, Nancy, and his need to care for his brother Damon, who was facing significant medical challenges. The man found himself in the middle of these complicated family dynamics, being asked to carry the emotional and financial burden of two very demanding individuals in his family. Nancy, the sister in question, was not the kind of person who was content with what she had. Instead, she demanded more, always more. Despite being an adult, she acted as though she were still the spoiled child of the family, a person who had always been the center of attention. She was, in the narrator's words, a narcissist, focused on herself to such an extreme that the needs of her family, including her brother Damon and the man himself, were completely disregarded. For him, this behavior wasn't something new. Nancy had always been selfish, but after their father's death, it became even worse. Nancy's behavior was especially hurtful because their father had been the glue holding the family together, and once he was gone, the family dynamic unraveled. This unraveling was painfully clear when the narrator was asked to pay for Damon's medical bills. Damon, despite his severe medical conditions, had been a source of stress for the narrator, as his financial and medical needs were overwhelming. However, the narrator was willing to support him. The problem came when Nancy, who had her own financial demands, began to add pressure to the already strained family situation. She started to make requests that were not only unreasonable, but also financially draining, especially considering the fact that she had not made any effort to contribute or show appreciation for the sacrifices made by her brother. This type of manipulation, especially from a sibling, is one of the most emotionally damaging types of family conflict, as it often pits family members against one another and leaves the caregiver feeling unappreciated. As the tension escalated, Nancy's behavior became even more aggressive. She would demand large sums of money without ever offering anything in return. The man was left wondering how his sister, who had always been so self-absorbed, could continue to act as though her needs were the only ones that mattered. As if this wasn't enough, Nancy's demands were becoming increasingly more intrusive, and she started making inappropriate remarks about the man's role in the family, trying to manipulate him emotionally by guilt-tripping him. She would guilt him into paying for things by bringing up the father's death, which was, in her view, a reason for him to step up and provide for her. But the more Nancy demanded, the more the narrator felt trapped. It became clear that no matter how much he gave, it would never be enough to satisfy her. This situation reached its breaking point when Nancy went as far as to demand that the man pay for her extravagant lifestyle, something that he couldn't afford. She demanded that he help her pay for things like her car payment and her living expenses, despite the fact that she was perfectly capable of supporting herself. In fact, the man began to question whether Nancy had ever truly been grateful for anything he had done for her. Over time, he began to realize that her expectations of him were unreasonable, and she was only interested in using him as a means to an end. The emotional strain of constantly being asked to give more and more without ever receiving anything in return took its toll on him. As the months passed, the man became increasingly exhausted, both emotionally and financially. He reached the point where he could no longer keep giving, he had nothing left to give. The final straw came when Nancy tried to push him into a corner by demanding that he pay for another one of her lavish spending sprees. It was at that moment that he made the difficult decision to cut her off. He had given her so much of himself only to be met with selfishness and a complete lack of gratitude. He realized that continuing to engage with her would only cause him more pain and resentment, so he decided to prioritize his own well-being. But this decision wasn't easy, and it wasn't made lightly. The man knew that distancing himself from his mother and sister would be a painful process. His mother, who had always been somewhat passive in the family's dynamic, was also affected by this decision. She had never stepped in to prevent Nancy from taking advantage of the man, and now she seemed to side with Nancy, as if her own financial stability and happiness mattered more than the emotional and financial burden her son had been carrying for years. For the man, this was an eye-opening realization that, despite all his efforts, his family had failed him when he needed them the most. The decision to cut ties with his mother and sister was not a choice the man made lightly. It was a process that required him to let go of the guilt, the obligation, and the sense of familial duty that had bound him for so long. But by doing so, he was able to reclaim his own life. He no longer had to live under the constant pressure of Nancy's demands or deal with the emotional manipulation from his mother. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of freedom, knowing that he had made a choice to prioritize his own health and happiness over toxic family expectations. In the aftermath of his decision, the man began to rebuild his life. He found peace in his relationships with friends who respected him and valued him for who he was, not for what he could provide. He reconnected with his own goals and dreams, which he had put on hold for so long in order to meet the needs of his family. And while the process of cutting ties with his family was painful, it was ultimately a necessary step toward healing and self-discovery. This story is a powerful reminder that sometimes, in order to move forward, we must let go of the toxic people in our lives, especially those we call family. It's not about rejecting them, but about protecting our own emotional and financial well-being. By setting healthy boundaries, we can take control of our own lives and create healthier, more supportive relationships. In a story that many can relate to, a man shares his deeply emotional journey through family dynamics marked by manipulation, favoritism, and betrayal. The narrative begins with a troubling revelation about his family's treatment of him and the destructive consequences that followed. The man, who had spent years working hard, achieving success, and trying to build a life of his own, found himself trapped in a web of financial responsibility and emotional manipulation created by his parents. The most painful aspect of his story was the toxic favoritism shown to his younger brother, Tristan, the so-called golden child who was consistently shielded from the consequences of his reckless behavior while the narrator was made to bear the brunt of the family's financial burdens. The betrayal reached a boiling point when the man was asked to pay for the damages caused by his brother's drunk driving accident, an incident that not only affected his personal finances, but also revealed the deep-seated manipulation within his family. For many people, family is a source of comfort and support, a network of love and care that guides them through life's challenges. However, for others, family can be a source of emotional turmoil, as this man's story vividly demonstrates. From an early age, he had been the dependable one, the one who worked hard, achieved goals, and made responsible choices. In contrast, his younger brother Tristan was treated with an indulgence that was not earned but given freely by their parents. Tristan's reckless behavior, which included frequent drinking, driving under the influence, and an utter disregard for consequences, was overlooked or excused by their parents, who had an unhealthy attachment to him as their golden child. This favoritism created an emotional chasm between the two brothers, one that would only grow wider over time. The tipping point came when Tristan, who had already crashed a car while drunk, got into another accident, this time wrecking an expensive Tesla. The aftermath of the crash was nothing short of shocking. Instead of being held accountable for his actions, Tristan's parents chose to ignore the severity of his behavior and put the financial responsibility squarely on the narrator's shoulders. They demanded that he pay the $14,500 damage fee for the car, even though he was already struggling to make ends meet. The unfairness of the situation was staggering, as the narrator was expected to financially support a brother who had, by all accounts, shown no regard for the family or the consequences of his actions. What followed was a series of shocking events that further unveiled the toxic dynamics within the family. The narrator's refusal to pay for the damages caused by his brother's irresponsible actions was met with even greater manipulation from his parents. The situation became worse when his family attempted to frame him for vandalism in an effort to force him into taking responsibility for the car's damage. They even tried to manipulate the legal system by suggesting that he was involved in the accident in some way. The emotional and financial weight of these accusations was unbearable for the narrator, who felt not only betrayed by his brother and parents, but also abandoned by them in his time of need. The emotional toll of this family betrayal was profound. As the narrator grappled with the idea that the people he had loved and trusted had turned on him, he realized that he had been carrying an unfair burden for far too long. Despite his hard work and dedication, his parents had never fully recognized or appreciated his sacrifices. Instead, they continually placed the needs of his brother Tristan above his own, even when it was clear that Tristan's behavior was not only destructive to himself, but to the family as a whole. The man's sense of betrayal deepened as he realized that, for years, he had been the scapegoat for his brother's mistakes, while Tristan was protected by their parents' misguided sense of love and favoritism. The emotional toll reached its breaking point when the narrator made the difficult decision to sever ties with his family. He realized that, in order to protect his own mental health and emotional well-being, he needed to walk away from a family that had consistently shown him disrespect and favoritism toward his brother. For many people, making the decision to cut ties with family can be one of the hardest choices to make. However, in this case, it was clear that the man had reached his limit. He had spent years trying to maintain a relationship with people who, despite his best efforts, continued to manipulate and exploit him. The realization that he could no longer rely on them for support was painful but necessary. The man's decision to cut ties with his family was not a decision he made lightly, nor was it an easy one. It required him to confront painful truths about the people he had once looked up to and trusted. For years, he had been the dependable one, the one who always stepped in to help and support those around him. Yet, when he needed help the most, his family turned their backs on him in favor of his brother. The decision to prioritize his own well-being over his family's demands was a hard-fought victory, one that allowed him to reclaim his life and start over. It was a difficult but ultimately empowering choice that helped him realize that his own happiness and peace of mind were worth far more than the toxic relationships he had been holding on to for so long. In the aftermath of cutting ties with his family, the man began to rebuild his life. He took the time to reflect on his own values and what truly mattered to him. He realized that, in order to move forward, he needed to let go of the past and the emotional baggage that had been weighing him down for so long. By focusing on his own needs and desires, he was able to find peace and healing. He also found strength in the support of his friends and those who truly cared about him. This experience taught him the value of setting boundaries and the importance of prioritizing his own mental and emotional health. This story serves as a powerful reminder that sometimes we must let go of toxic family relationships in order to protect ourselves. The man's journey is a testament to the strength it takes to walk away from family members who are emotionally manipulative and exploitative. While it can be incredibly difficult to sever ties with family, sometimes it is the only way to reclaim our lives and move forward with a sense of peace and purpose. Through this experience, the man learned the importance of self-care, setting boundaries, and taking control of his own happiness. It is a lesson that can inspire others who find themselves in similarly toxic relationships to take the difficult but necessary step toward healing and self-discovery. In the world of family dynamics, relationships can often become a complex web of expectations, sacrifices, and disappointments. One particular story highlights how, despite a tremendous amount of effort and personal sacrifice, a person can find themselves completely ignored and disregarded by their in-laws, even when they go above and beyond to be a supportive figure. This is the story of a woman who, despite organizing and paying for a special celebration for her mother-in-law's 50th birthday, found herself betrayed by her in-laws in the most unexpected and hurtful way. The woman, a 26-year-old named Sarah, had been married to her husband for a few years, and throughout that time, she had always tried to be the supportive and thoughtful member of the family. When her mother-in-law Jennifer turned 50, Sarah knew it was an important milestone. She also knew that Jennifer's other children had never stepped up to help with family celebrations, so Sarah took it upon herself to make sure that her mother-in-law's 50th birthday would be a memorable one. Sarah organized the entire event, from the venue to the guest list, and she paid for everything determined to make the occasion special, despite the lack of support from her in-laws. Sarah's efforts to create a beautiful celebration were not motivated by a need for praise or recognition. Rather, she genuinely wanted to make Jennifer feel appreciated on her milestone birthday. However, as the event grew closer, Sarah began to realize that her in-laws, who had long been distant and disinterested, were once again failing to show any signs of appreciation for her sacrifices. They made no effort to contribute, not even offering a token of support, which left Sarah feeling unimportant and undervalued. In the midst of preparing for the celebration, Sarah faced additional emotional turmoil when her mother-in-law made a surprising announcement. Jennifer had decided, just days before the event, that she did not want Sarah to attend her own planned birthday party. This left Sarah in a state of disbelief and confusion. She had worked tirelessly to create an event that would celebrate her mother-in-law. But now she was being excluded from the very celebration she had planned. Her in-laws, who had never offered any meaningful support, had effectively excluded her from a party that she had paid for and organized. This betrayal was a deep blow to Sarah, who had hoped that her genuine efforts would foster a sense of warmth and family unity. The reality of being shut out, despite everything she had done for her mother-in-law, made her question her place in the family. Sarah's hurt turned to frustration, as she realized that no matter how much she gave, her efforts were consistently ignored and undervalued. It was at this point that Sarah decided she had had enough. After the party was canceled and her mother-in-law's dismissive attitude persisted, Sarah made a bold decision. She chose to cancel the event altogether. Instead of spending time and energy on a family that had shown her nothing but disregard, she decided to invite her own friends and focus on celebrating with people who appreciated her. This was a powerful turning point for Sarah, as it marked her decision to no longer prioritize toxic relationships. The decision to cancel the event and turn her attention toward her friends, rather than her ungrateful in-laws, was a liberating one. It signified Sarah's willingness to break free from family expectations that had long made her feel unworthy and invisible. By reasserting control over her own happiness and choosing to spend the evening with people who respected and valued her, Sarah found a sense of peace that had long eluded her within her husband's family. The most important lesson from Sarah's experience is the importance of setting boundaries and valuing oneself in the face of familial neglect. Sarah's actions demonstrate that, at some point, the sacrifices and efforts we make for others, especially when those efforts go unappreciated, can only continue for so long before we need to protect our own mental and emotional well-being. The story serves as a reminder that love and respect should be mutual in relationships, whether with family, friends, or partners. When these elements are missing, it is crucial to prioritize one's own needs and seek out relationships that offer true support and appreciation. By taking control of the situation and choosing to surround herself with people who treated her with kindness and respect, Sarah also made a powerful statement about what it means to reclaim one's worth. The refusal to tolerate mistreatment from her in-laws allowed Sarah to take a step toward healing and self-empowerment. This experience ultimately led her to reevaluate her relationships and focus on cultivating connections that nurtured her rather than drained her. It also highlighted the importance of self-care in the face of toxic relationships. The emotional burden of constantly giving to people who take, without giving back, can be exhausting. And Sarah's decision to walk away from that dynamic was a healthy form of self-care. Sometimes, taking a step back from a relationship, especially a family relationship, is necessary in order to maintain one's own peace of mind and happiness. In the end, Sarah's story is one of self-empowerment and resilience. Though she faced a deep sense of betrayal and rejection, she refused to let it define her. Instead, she took action to protect herself and prioritize her own happiness. It serves as an important reminder that no one should feel obligated to tolerate mistreatment, especially when it comes from those who should care for us most. By choosing to focus on her own well-being and cutting ties with those who took advantage of her, Sarah was able to create space for healing and growth, ultimately leading her to a more fulfilling and peaceful life. This story resonates with anyone who has ever felt unappreciated or overlooked by their family. It's a reminder that we don't have to accept toxic dynamics and that it's okay to step away from relationships that no longer serve us. By doing so, we open ourselves up to healthier, more supportive connections and create the space we need to thrive. Life is full of challenges, and sometimes, even the people we love most can make us feel undervalued or unappreciated. The story of Sarah teaches us an important lesson about the importance of self-worth, boundaries, and choosing our emotional well-being over toxic relationships. As we grow older, it becomes increasingly important to surround ourselves with people who respect and care for us. Sometimes, despite all the love and effort we put into others, we may be met with disappointment and hurt. But it's never too late to choose our own peace and happiness. Setting boundaries, even with family, is essential for maintaining mental and emotional health. This doesn't mean we stop caring or loving, but rather that we recognize our own needs and refuse to tolerate mistreatment. Life is about balance, giving and receiving, loving and being loved. It's never too late to prioritize yourself, even after years of sacrifice. By doing so, we create space for growth, healing, and joy. Just as Sarah found comfort in reconnecting with friends who valued her, we too can find strength in the relationships that truly nurture us. Remember, you deserve respect, love, and peace. Don't let anyone take that away from you. Your worth is not determined by others' actions, but by how you treat yourself. Thank you so much for watching. We hope this story touched you as much as it touched us. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video and hit that subscribe button so you won't miss out on future content. Remember, at Silent Wars, we bring you the most meaningful stories from the Reddit family community. Stay tuned, and we'll see you in the next video.